then let's just look at some of the new mutators. Just discuss them real quick. A new challenger. Your champion is randomly replaced by one that is not from your primary or ally clan. That can enable some very funky gameplay, like having Conduit Tethys in a non-Stygian deck. That could be pretty fun. Or yeah, there are a lot of interesting possibilities with this one, but it's random, so non-champion units cost +2 Ember, start with Sketches of Salvation. I think this is very straightforward. Pick the biggest stuff you can get, or maybe pick a bunch of Incant units, and just remove all the Train Stewards and stick to your simple plan of Sketches of Salvation. Arcane Arch is pretty simple as well. Enemy units enter with spell weakness 1. Nice benefit if you have big damage spells. Not that useful for Awoken and Remnant. Also not that useful for Hellhorn, now that I think about it. But they do have some uses for it. At your service, start with 2 additional Train Stewards and Advanced Prototype. That definitely makes the early game a lot easier. These Train Stewards will stop being useful eventually, despite the prototype, but you can upgrade some of them, maybe give them strength and another multi-strike, and suddenly they are actually quite capable. But they're not gonna really carry you into the end game. You will need some way of buffing these up. Maybe a Razor Sharp Edge can be enough, especially because of the multi-strike. This becomes drastically more viable with something like Duality. Big Chungos. All friendly units get +1 capacity. That's a really rough modifier. Suddenly you can't use 2 units that are 2 capacity on the same floor. The more units you use on a single floor, the more it hurts you. Something like 3 capacity units, like a Demon Fiend, like a Penumbra, maybe a Trample Penumbra, if you can get the capacity for that, can work pretty well. But the morsels are straight out drags, drafts, really, really rough. Yeah, single Train Stewards in the first fights. That's brutal. Big Changa seems really one of the most difficult mutators out there, and that's counting some things like Brawl and damage shields as well. Bleeding Cash, lose 1 coin whenever a friendly unit takes damage. Losing 1 coin is uncommon because usually you use coins in multiples of 5 and you get them in multiples of 5, but Bleeding Cash is the exception, I guess. It's hard to evaluate how much cash you're gonna lose to that, but it can easily be like 20, 30, maybe even more a fight. Quick makes it a bit less painful, but overall I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's basically a weaker Tithe, in my opinion. Most of the time, Tithe will cost you more gold than Bleeding Cash. These are the old ones. Buying Power. Merchants provide a card duplication service. I think this one has more than any other modifier, this one has the potential to really blow up the potential of flying boss kills. Spend your money in every shop. Yeah, maybe. But even if you don't, if you lose like 30, 35 coins in a fight, that's not that bad. And oftentimes you will lose less than that, I think. Buying power, you can really easily build your insane combos, duplicate your multi-striking shadow sieges, your furnace taps, your one-horn storms, your hoarfrost effigies. All you need to combo down a flying seraph very easily. This is otherwise not that impactful, I think. The card duplication service is pretty expensive. I think it starts out at about 90 gold and quickly becomes more expensive from there on out. Cheap trick, we already know that. Come prepared, add 12 additional random cards to your starting deck. This sounds like it can be really fun because you will have a very wild deck and a lot more things to build around and to remove. I really like that. I would love to play a challenge with this. Yeah, it seems fun. It's probably a stronger starting deck just because you don't have as big an amount of train stewards and basic spells in your deck, so this helps fill some more impactful spells into your deck without having the straight up synergy a carefully constructed deck will have. But still, the early fights should be easier with this. Start with Dante the Deceptive and 3 Dante's Candles. I'm not sure. I mean, this basically means you have to build around Dante, and it's very, very powerful if you get it together with one of the Blight mutators. But yeah, basically this means build around Dante and you win. Oftentimes. Very strong. Might be a bit of trouble in the early game when you can't really make good use of Dante yet, but after that, powerful. Your Pyre gets plus 80 health, basically does nothing in most runs, because, yeah, I guess it makes very extreme challenges a bit easier. Something like Covenant 25 with bad modifiers, you might actually burn through all of the Pyre health. Remove the champion from your starting deck. I guess early fights are a nightmare with this. Oftentimes you rely heavily on your champion, but some clans do less so than others. Like Stygian doesn't really rely on its champion that much this early on, and often relies on the big damage spells they get from the Covenant 1 cards. We already know that. Final Shard, we just played with it. It makes some challenges very dangerous. You really need to consider whether or not you can deal with a challenge before setting up. Because if you let 3 enemies pass, you're done. If you let an enemy with high health pass, you are done as well. You can't just leak some pyre damage and be fine with it. You have exactly 2 sources of pyre damage you can survive, and then it's over. Yeah, Fallen Champion definitely makes a lot of clans play quite a bit differently. You really need your priority units to have front loader power oftentimes, because you will be relying on these for the first few waves. All units have googly eyes in battle. Of course, that's very cool, very nice. Looks quite nice. I think the placement of these are mostly spot on right now, even though they have been tweaked quite a bit since this was included in the private beta. Gravity, we played with this. It's a real game changer. Makes picking multiple units better. You need to optimize your synergy on a single floor, because it's gonna be really hard catching units that manage to escape from your bottom floor, unless you have something like Graphs, which can really bring burst damage on the turn you play them. Highly reactive. I played with this one in the closed beta and it was insanely powerful. It triggers Eaten and Gorge twice, it triggers Slay twice, Resolve is usually pretty tame. Revenge, the Wrathful champion with Revenge and Slay gets really crazy with this. There are a lot of very powerful cards with this. Incant, for example, also triggers twice. So this is super powerful. Hive Mind, we already played with this once. It's interesting. Not as impactful as it could be most of the times, just because it only applies to very specific relics and units. But if you manage to get one of them, you can do some really crazy stuff. Oftentimes you will be heavily looking for some units. Also, Awoken and Stygian almost have no synergy whatsoever with this challenge, while Umbra, Hellhound and Remnant have quite a few. Enemy units get haste. Makes your second floor almost useless. You can put some support units there, but that's not that impactful oftentimes. But it can help. I used it to feed a an Overgorger, while it wasn't strong enough to fight yet. Other than that, obviously you need to prepare for the enemies to reach the pyre a turn faster. So you need a bit more front-loaded damage. Luxury in Limbo. Additional unit banners appear in Limbo. I think it's one of each of your clans, but I'm not entirely sure. That's very, very powerful and will make the first fights a lot easier and allow you to decide on a strategy a bit earlier. I think that's pretty strong overall, but obviously the effect will be lessened the further you go, because by the time you get to fell these early units, I mean, they still matter, but you would have seen quite a few units by then anyway, so. Multiplier, your Pyre gets multi-strike 1. That's actually pretty interesting, but most of the time it won't really matter for scoring runs. But you could do some fun Pyre builds with that, with things like Boon of a Blacksmith and Ascension and then Heaven's Gold. You could make a really strong Pyre. Ninja Training, minor bosses enter with Stealth 5. That's scary. I mean, the Stealth 8 boss, the Crystal Cloak, is already pretty scary. And having Stealth 5 on every boss, including some that deal way more damage than the Crystal Cloak, and including some that appear way earlier. First boss with Stealth 5, that's tough. You need a lot of health, a really strong tank to be able to deal with that. Or something like a huge regen stack or a lot of sap on them. All cards have one fewer upgrade slot. That makes flying kills a lot harder, because you can't have multiple instances of multi-strike, and you can't have double stack holdover or something like that. So your cards still perform, but they're a bit harder to optimize. It's harder to build around a single 1 or 2 cards in your deck that really carry the run, and that is usually how you do flying boss kills. So this is gonna make it a lot harder. Other than that, I think it's not that bad of a challenge. Yeah, Ninja Training with Duality would be crazy. One track mind, the path you take on the map is chosen automatically. I don't really like mutators like that, just because it does take away some player agency. I think choosing the path you want is important. Not a big fan of this modifier. Other than that, I guess you have to prepare for not seeing another Merchant of Steel after your first one, not seeing another Merchant of Magic after your first one, so keep that in mind when you choose upgrades. Then again, you might see multiple so it's hard to evaluate. Protect the pyres. Same as most of the pyre buffing modifiers, it's most of the time not that impactful. Having pyre wall means you can leak some damage and still not lose points, which is nice. Allows you to be a bit more risky, more high rolly in your deck building. Puny things, similar to how the other one that makes all unit +1 capacity, the puny things is also one of the most impactful mutators. All units are 1 capacity, means you can really overstack floors very easily. It makes Umbra a bit more powerful because you can actually use Gorge unit as frontliners and have a backliner behind them that only takes up 2 capacity, so you still have room for morsels. And yeah, there are quite a few other units that benefit a lot from this. Umbra is just something that came to mind. Return on investment. Spawn an additional collector in battles that already have a collector. That means you should prepare to deal with these collectors, because otherwise you are losing out on a ton of value. I think the second collector spawns on turn 3. I have played one of these challenges, and I think the second collector spawns a turn after the first. It's still bugged. I'm not sure. I played it a while ago and I don't remember it very clearly. I think it was bugged back then to spawn more than 1 additional collector, but 1 every turn? I don't think it was 1 every turn in every combat, at least. Some combats only had 2, but I don't remember it clearly. Apply Fragile to the first friendly unit summoned each turn. This is interesting. Remnant can deal with this very well. Hellhorn does have some ways to deal with it with armor. Same goes for Stygian. Awoken and Umbra. Umbra can deal with it by playing morsels first. And Awoken really struggles with this, I think. So Awoken really needs to rely on its secondary clan, and if the secondary clan is something like Hellhorn, that's gonna be rough. But you obviously need to pay close attention to how you play out your units with this. Starry Suffering. Friendly units enter with days 2. This is pretty rough for Remnant, especially. Sometimes for Umbra as well. Makes resolve units a lot harder to use. And most importantly, the first 1 or 2 waves are pretty difficult to deal with. You need some way to deal with them without units or with just the units on the top floor. You play them on the top floor, yeah, they can fight. That works. Unless you're playing on Covenant 10 or above, because then it will be days 3 and they can't fight before the first wave gets through. So definitely keep your eye out for spells, or maybe something like Ascend and Daze the enemy unit, so you can move them to the pyre and let the pyre kill them. But other than that, it just means that you often have to set up on the top floor, I guess. Outside of High Covenants. Strike hard, all units get multi-strike 1. This is gonna be really crazy. That's usually gonna be a big buff for you, more so than the enemies, but some enemies do get quite scary with multi-strike 1. For example, Nephim with his 25 attack and trample can deal a lot of damage. But also, if you can kill the backliners early on, especially early on, that can be quite scary when your units aren't when you aren't able to scale that well. Quick is really good with this. Nephil is a she? Okay, I didn't know that. Math challenge. Room combat previews are disabled. I guess that's a challenge for me. because I often calculate these things, but it can be quite difficult if some things are involved. I often start with the combat preview before calculating these things, so apply fragile to non-boss enemy units when they enter the pyre room, so they only hit the pyre once. If you just have a pyre funnel, no, vent funnel, something funnel that dazes all enemies in the pyre floor and reduces the pyre power. Vapor funnel, exactly. Then all the non-boss enemies become a non-issue. You can just leak them, no problem. You just need to be able to kill the boss. Other than that, you can leak some enemies a bit easier. For example, Gilded Wings. They will only hit your pyre once. Keep in mind, armored units can survive because they don't lose HP, but most armored units aren't very good at damaging your pyre anyways. Upgraded drafts is really fun. It's one of my favorite new mutators. Cards in reward packs and unit banners come with a random upgrade. That's very fun because it makes your drafts more important. You have much more options because some spells will have different upgrades. And yeah, it's just really interesting to me. Also, your late drafts matter a bit more because oftentimes you skip many late drafts if they don't fit exactly into your build. This might give you some interesting choices even late in the run. Vampiric Touch, all units enter with lifesteal 3. Most enemies don't really benefit that much from lifesteal because either they have very low health and die when they take damage, or they have very high health and not that high attack, so they won't heal a significant amount. But it's pretty good for your units, so I think it's overall a very clearly beneficial mutator. Oh, that used to not care if the upgrade did anything to the card. Okay, yeah, that's a bit less exciting. But now I think it does, because I have never seen a card where the upgrade does literally nothing. I mean, some of the upgrades are pretty bad. Something like Wigstone on a Titan Sentry or something like that, but oftentimes they are significant. Okay, glad it does now. Volatile spells. The targets of spells are chosen randomly. This can work out decently for magic power packed models. Okay. As long as you're not getting consume removal on your awake or something like that. Targets of the spells are chosen randomly. You need to be careful which spells to choose. Some spells target only enemies. Some spells target all units. Some spells already target random. So just keep that in mind and try not to gamble too much. Otherwise the torch you played might kill your sap totem. I.e. I had to take that gamble with this challenge at least once. And let me tell you, it's a bit scary. Wand of Cure Light Wounds, restore 5 health to all units after combat. Once again, healing is usually more beneficial to you, because 5 health is not a lot for your enemies. It's not that much for you either, but still nice to have. It's very good with Rejuvenate, obviously, so you benefit a lot from having Rejuvenate units with this one. I actually suggested the name for this with a different effect. I suggested restore 50% of missing health to all units after combat, which would have been a lot more beneficial for the enemies. Basically, Heaven Seal Light for everyone. And finally, Zoom Enhance. All cards have one additional upgrade slot. I guess it's the opposite of no fluff, makes it a lot easier to build around a single powerful card and thus makes flying boss kill a lot easier. And also the late game in general won't help a lot in the early game. So that's my impression of the new mutators. I am definitely looking forward to them appearing in the daily challenge. Currently they won't appear. That's because these daily challenge are generated in advance and I think they are generated without the new mutator pool beforehand. But I hope that after the Steve could change that. Yeah, I need to talk to. Oh, he's on vacation. Okay, too bad. I really hope when this update comes to life, we will start seeing the new mutators in the daily challenge immediately, because I really look forward to playing with them, not just in custom challenges, but also in the daily challenge I usually do every day. So, that's gonna be the end from me today. Thank you guys all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the stream. Thanks. Also, thank you to Rossum especially, but all the others as well for participating in the discussion. It was interesting, and I hope you enjoyed my mutator analysis as well. Let's see if there's a stream we can raid. Let's raid Sneaky Teak. Sneaky Teak is currently playing Opus Magnum, I think. That looks like Rocket League to me. A bit. But Sneaky Streak is a great streamer who does amazing Monster Train content. He's not currently playing Monster Train, but you might want to look out for him. He's a very, very good player. Okay. Good night.
Nice shot.